If you're work from home and considering working from home overseas for your Australian employer, this is important. Number one, you've got to be a non-tax resident of Australia. If you're still a tax resident, it doesn't matter where you are, your foreign income is still taxed in Australia anyway. But say you do cease Australian residency, have an Australian employer, and you work remotely from Thailand. The question is, does it have an Australian source? Because if it's Australian sourced income, it's still taxable in Australia, no matter where in the world that you earn it. There is a relatively old ruling on this called ATO ID 2002/181. And it relies on a case called Cam & Sons. And in that case, they decided that it's where the person physically performs their duties is where the source is. And this makes a lot of sense. If you are in Australia, doing all your work in Australia for an Australian employer, yes, it's Australian source. If you are doing the thing from Thailand, it's potentially not taxable if you can do all of your work in Thailand and be a non-resident. This can even be the case with short trips to Australia, which are just incidental to your work. An issue does arise with the double tax treaty. If there is a double tax treaty in place between Australia and the country that you are now going to be tax resident in, it may deem source. This is because the tax treaties go into local law and they override the entire tax act when they are triggered. There was a ruling a few weeks ago where a taxpayer was working overseas for an Australian-based employer and the double tax treaty came into play, and because it said Australia may tax the income, it actually allocated the full taxing rights to Australia, so it wouldn't have been Australian sourced income, but for the treaty overrode those concepts because those two countries had that treaty. It also doesn't help that every tax treaty is a little bit different. Unfortunately, there's not any easy answers here. Depending where you're going, depending on what the type of work is and your travel to Australia, you're going to need to get professional advice.